Hello, my little dumplings. This is Pop Pop again. I am going to be reading chapter 8 to you, and the name of the chapter is A Talk at Home. And chapter 8 is Roman numeral number 8 because I know you're interested in those numbers. It's VIII, which in Roman numerals is number 8. Anyway, here goes. On Sunday morning, Mr. and Mrs. Arable and Fern were sitting at the breakfast table in the kitchen. Avery had finished and was upstairs looking for his slingshot. Did you know that Uncle Hornet's goslings had hatched? Said Fern. How many? Asked Arable. 7, replied Fern. There were 8 eggs, but one egg didn't hatch, and the goose told Templeton she didn't want it any more, so he took it away. The goose did what? Asked Arable, gazing at her daughter with a queer, worried look. Told Templeton she didn't want the egg any more, repeated Fern. Who is Templeton? Asked Arable. He's the rat, replied Fern. None of us like him much. Who's us? Asked Arable. Oh, everybody in the barn. Wilbur and the sheep and the lambs and the goose and the gander and the goslings and Charlotte and me. Charlotte, said Mrs. Arable. Who's Charlotte? She's Wilbur's best friend. She's terribly clever. What does she look like? Asked Mrs. Arable. Well, I Fern thoughtfully. She has 8 legs. All spiders do, I guess. Charlotte is a spider? Asked Fern's mother. Fern nodded yes. Big gray one. She has a web across the top of Wilbur's doorway. She catches flies, sucks their blood. Wilbur adores her. Does she really? Says Mrs. Arable rather vaguely. She was staring at Fern with a worried expression on her face. Oh, yes, Wilbur adores Charlotte, said Fern. Do you know that Charlotte said when the goslings hatched? I haven't the faintest idea, said Mrs. Arable. Tell us. Well, when the first gosling stuck its little head out from underneath the goose, it was sitting on my stool in the corner, and Charlotte was on her web. She made a speech. She said, I am sure that every one of us here in the barn will be gratified to learn that after 4 weeks of unremitting effort and patience on the part of the goose, she now has something to show for it. Don't you think that was a pleasant thing for her to say? Yes, I do, said Mrs. Arable. And now, Fern, it's time to get ready for Sunday school and tell Avery to get ready also. And this afternoon, you can tell me more about what goes on in Uncle Homer's barn. Aren't you spending quite a lot of time there? You go there almost every afternoon, don't you? I like it there, replied Fern. She wiped her mouth and ran upstairs. After she had left the room, Mrs. Arable spoke in a very low voice to her husband. I worry about Fern, she said. Did you hear the way she rambled about the animals, pretending that they talked? Mrs. Arable chuckled. Maybe they do talk, he said. I've sometimes wondered. At any rate, don't worry about Fern. She just has a lively imaginations. Kid thinks, Kids think that they hear things, all sorts of things all the time. Just the same, I do worry about her, replied Mrs. Arable. I think I should ask Mrs. Dorian about her the next time I see her. He loves Fern almost as much as we do, and I want him to know how queerly she is acting about the pig and everything else. I don't think it's normal. You know perfectly well animals don't talk. Mrs. Arable grinned. Maybe our ears aren't as sharp as Fern's, he said. That's the end of chapter 8. Chapter 9 to be continued. Bye bye, says Papa.